Welcome to the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society podcast. The Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society publishes academic articles on the history, archaeology, literature, language, religion, and arts of South Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. It has been published by the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland since 1834. We are delighted today to have this opportunity to introduce a new special issue of the journal. Its title is Mobilizing Global Knowledge, Institutionalizing Expertise in East Asia's Industrial Transition. Its guest editors are Hailian Chen and Naofumi Nakamura. We do this podcast to share with you some insight into the making of this special issue, which readers wouldn't see in print. My name is Weipin Tsai, historian of modern Chinese history at Royal Holloway, University of London. I am also assistant editor of the journal. I'm delighted to be joined by the editor of the journal, Dr. Daud Ali, historian of pre-Mughal South Asia, University of Pennsylvania, and Dr. Hailian Chen, an engineer sinologist at the Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany, and Professor Janet Hunter, Emeritus Professor of Japanese Economic History at the London School of Economics. Let me kick off by going to Daud. So Daud, can you tell us more about the journal and introduce the themes of this special issue, please?
Thank you, Weipin. The journal, as you mentioned, publishes widely across a number of fields in the regions of Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the Middle East and Central Asia. And we welcome submissions across all time periods in these regions. This issue is particularly significant for us because we have been trying to build up a steady stream of very high quality contributions in East Asian history. And the journal has traditionally been perhaps associated with antiquarianism and older periods of history, literature and philology, but we are very much attempting to broaden our traditional focus. And the suggestion for this issue what was immediately welcomed across the editorial board, and we were very excited. I have to thank Tsai Weipin and the guest editors for making it, from my perspective, an almost flawlessly smooth process of bringing the articles in, editing them, and producing what I think is a very fine and issue which we are very excited about. And part of that is, as I said, that we have traditionally focused, I think, more on earlier periods, and we're very excited to include modern economic history and institutional history as part of this special issue. And the perspective taken here, that of focusing on expertise and experts and the transformation of and knowledge transmission and the transformation of what the editors have called human resources in the process of the modernization of East Asian economies is very new and very exciting for us. And that's really all I have to say, but we're really excited to hear from the editors and the authors here today about how this all came together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daud. And certainly we can't say enough thanks to the guest editors. So I guess following on what Daud just said, Hailian, as one of the guest editors, Could you share with us the origins of these projects and the key scholarly contributions? Hailian, over to you.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you, Weipin and thank Daud for this wonderful opening. And first of all, also, of course, on the behalf of guest editors and all of our authors in special issue, I would like to thank Weipin and Daud for providing, and also Matty for providing this tremendous support to publish this special issue. And as you can see, there are 7 research articles in this special issue. So they derive from a conference. Specifically, it's from the 26th World Economic History Congress in July 2022 in Paris. And the theme of that congress was resources. That's how we started with human resources. That's the basic concept on there. But even before the Congress, back in 2020, and we already started discussing a panel or panels on the role of human capital or specialized talents in transforming East Asia. So we are quite successful. We successfully invited a variety of scholars focusing on engineers, merchants, and labor. So these 3 categories actually represented the non-scholarly group in the context of East Asia's Confucian tradition. So they were the 3 groups below the scholars that in their social hierarchy. And they stood for the different aspects of the human resource management in which the distinctive characteristics of modernization and industrialization in East Asia can be explored. So that this was our ambitious start in planning this Congress panel and the later special issue. But also with this opportunity, I would like to thank 2 German scholars on the Japanese studies, Professor Erich Pauer and Professor Regina Matthias, who first invited me to join their workshop on technical education in modern Japan in 2019. So through that workshop that I got to know Janet here and also Naofumi, the Professor Nakamura, my co-organizer of the panel and also the co-guest editor of this special issue. So that's around that same time in 2019, I started my own research project on the history of technical education in late Qing China. So at which I conducted at the University of Leipzig. So this special issue is continue the collaboration of our shared interest in the history of technology and engineers and economic history in general. And also should also here mention, would like to thank the Professor George Sosa Paul for comment on our panel and also for thank Professor Kiang-Ki Pyong and Dr. Torben Pelzer for their inspiring presentations and discussions over the course. And so now I would like to highlight a few features of this special issue in terms of contributions. So in this multidisciplinary special issue, our authors bring together the case studies on the history of technology, trading or business history, and gender labor history together. So our articles attempt to break through the regional and disciplinary barriers while portraying a multifaceted East Asia in industrial transition. Our aim is not to test economic or social theory based upon the European models, not to bring forward a distinctively East Asia pattern of industrialization, as we are all doing empirical studies, so based on the primary sources working on the case studies. And our concrete case studies show how the expertise is mobilized and institutionalized in East Asia's industrial transition. So these papers, they depict different scenarios across the regions and time in East Asia and address the dynamics in mobilizing global knowledge and institutionalization of expertise in relation to the cross-regional and cross-cultural commercial management, engineering, and skilled labor cultivation. So at a historian, as I emphasize, our authors investigate a variety, a wide array of archive sources kept in East Asia as well as the US, and including, I just name a few of these primary sources that we were investigating, or we have investigated in this special issue. One category is the trading companies. For example, in Lin Yu's paper on the Taiwan sugar merchant, and also on Nakamura's paper on examining the trading company Okura in Meiji, Japan, and its locomotive trade in New York. Another category is the railway company, annual reports and statistics, and especially in Lin Chaisong's article on the colonial era Korean government railways. One category is government statistical reports, such as Jenny's article, so on the labor-intensive workforce strategies adopted by the Japanese postal and communication systems. And one further category is the graduate students' records, engineers' biographies, and autobiographies. That's in Wada's article on the early engineers' social background and their difficulties in finding employment in Meiji, Japan. And one further category is engineering journals. This could be seen in Wu Lingjun's article on how the Western standardization practice were introduced and transmitted, promoted in China during the first half of the 20th century. And the last category I would mention, I'll highlight, is the private archive sources. And that's also part of my focus, that what I examined is the Sheng Xuanhui's archive in my own article on the institutionalization of mining knowledge in the late Qing. So you put together these articles, they demonstrate how the global knowledge was mobilized via different networks. What we dealt with in the special issue include the trading, diplomatic, intellectual, professional networks. And also these articles demonstrate how the expertise was further institutionalized in formal or informal training systems in government or in private organizations, include the different technical schools or engineering associations and internal training programs in the companies or railway and the communication sectors. So, and the last, maybe I should also mention is that because we always talk about the transfer of technology between the East, the West, and the East, and so on. In this special issue, when we deal with the industrialization, this feature we have reviewed a very strong feature of interregional connections within East Asia, between Meiji Japan and Qing China, between Japan and its colonies in Korea and Taiwan, and beyond the global connectivity through mobilizing experts, goods, and ideas between East Asia, Europe, and America. Yeah.
Okay, excellent, Hailian. Thank you so much for providing us with this kind of very detailed outline. Thank you very much. I really encourage the audience to look online, check out our special issues in your own time. Right, so thank you, Hailian. We now turn to Janet. So Janet, could you shed some light on how you see this special issue within the broader context of economic history and labor history, especially in relation to Japanese studies as well as Korean studies? Janet.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank Hailian and the other organizers of the original panel and all those who participated in the special issue, because I've learned a huge amount from this process, and it's made me think about things I didn't necessarily think about before. I think there are many ways in which the papers in this special issue do make a contribution to economic history and indeed labor history. I can't talk about all of them, and I think particularly the issue of interdisciplinarity is something which hopefully we can come back to a little bit later in the podcast. But I think looking at it from the perspective of an economic historian, clearly there are a whole load of things that Hailian has already mentioned, but one that I think is particularly important is this whole question of the institutionalization of technology and skill acquisition, particularly in late industrializing economies. I mean, as many will know, the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Douglas North, a leading economist who got his Nobel Prize for his contribution to institutional economics, defined institutions as the humanly devised constraints that structure political, economic, and social interaction, indicating that institutionalization depends not only on the provision of appropriate organizations, but also on the evolution of social frameworks, something that is likely to take a considerable amount of time and constitute one of the most important challenges to the transmission and accumulation of new knowledge. And I think this sort of social embedding of new knowledge and technological acquisition is made clear in a number of the papers in this volume. For example, Masanori Wada's paper on the training of engineers in Japan, where they come up against the sort of social barriers to engineers having high status. You can give people as much knowledge as you like, but if they're not respected, that's obviously an additional challenge. And obviously the special issue when it comes to the institutionalization of technology and the training of skilled labor. We've got examples from both Japan and China, particularly in the relation to the training of engineers, obviously also studied by Hailian Chen as well as Professor Wada. And then the movement of, one of the papers, focuses on the movement towards standardization of technological standards. That's the paper by Lin-Chin Wu. But I think out of those papers comes almost a sort of even bigger agenda. And that is the whole issue of the role of the state in the acquisition and the accumulation of knowledge. What, for example, is the balance between the roles of the public sector and the private sector in this whole process? What are the motivations for the state and bureaucrats on the one hand and individuals and companies on the other to promote the development of knowledge in human capital, particularly for future generations? And I think a number of the papers here raise these very, very critical questions, which have in some ways long been studied by economic historians. Economic historians have always loved the balance between the state and the private sector. But I think a number of the papers here offer potentially new insights and also potentially new questions about that relationship. In terms of labor history, which again comes up in a number of the papers, many of the studies that, until relatively recently of the history of labor in East Asia, as well as elsewhere, have, I think, emerged out of two often distinct but overlapping traditions of scholarship. One was the so-called labor history movement that evolved in Western Europe from the 1960s, and which aimed at shifting the balance within historical study away from a traditional focus on elites, on the rich and the more powerful members of society, towards looking at what you can refer to as the working class, but these hitherto neglected groups of the population, particularly focusing on the industrialization period and subsequently. The research of many of these early labor history scholars was informed by left-wing ideologies that focused on the class system and the position of labor within it. But the second strand of scholarship, which has influenced this field, was a much more explicit Marxist-driven agenda, not just with the rise of communist ideologies in 20th century China, but also in early 20th century Japan, where Marxist interpretations of the historical dynamic were the dominant frameworks for economic and labor history analysis throughout, really from the 1900s through to the 1950s. So I think labor history now is enriched by both these traditions, but it's also enriched by the more interdisciplinary approaches that have characterized more recent scholarship, and which I think are very much reflected in this special issue. So it feeds into some of the papers in this issue, not only because labor is a crucial factor in the institutionalization of knowledge, but also because the small group of engineers or scholars, whom we're told in more than one of the papers play such a crucial role, emerge from the broader labor force. And that in turn, I think, draws us into broader issues of socialization and education, issues of the need for the state to identify the basic skills that it deems essential. And these in turn provide building blocks for the development and institutionalization of more sophisticated skills and knowledge, and then higher education for specialists. And as shown in Hailian's paper, among others, the operation of specialists, ideally, it needs workforce expertise as well. You can have the best specialists in the world, but if you haven't got expertise among the labor force, they're going to face severe challenges. And that leads us, of course, in turn, into labor management, the whole issue of incentives for labor, which are very difficult to assess, I think, for historians, but fundamental to issues such as career progression, remuneration, productivity, and welfare. And again, as Chai-Chung Lim's paper on Japan's Korean government railways shows, the Korean government railways clearly failed to incentivize Korean workers appropriately, resulting in a labor shortage. So I think there are a number of ways in which the papers in this special issue have the capacity to contribute to the broader debates in economic history and in labor history. And I hope that the readership of this special issue will go beyond those who work purely on East Asia and reach out to a broader audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you very much for painting this very colorful picture and putting the themes of special issue in the kind of globalization. And indeed, with your explanation, I can certainly see quite clearly about how the conversations, dialogues between East Asia, those countries we look at in this special issue, as well as other countries in Europe and in America. So thank you very much indeed. So now, as we learned already, this special issue has 7 articles plus an editorial notes. So in terms of a process, I was just wondering, I know Daud earlier said it run quite smoothly, but I'm going to press you a little bit. Is it true that the whole process was quite straightforward, or whether in fact it has some kind of challenges? But I guess this question is not just for Daud, but also for Hailian. Of course, Daud, because you worked so closely with the publisher of the journal, and Hailian, you also had close contact with the author. So I'm asking both of you with this question. So Daud, would you like to come in first?
I don't think I think in some ways, Weipin, you are better qualified to answer this question than I, because you work closely with the guest editors in the challenging task of bringing the papers together, and as with any editorial process, there were revisions that had to be done and decisions that had to be made. And I took a rather sort of clock watch or watch. No, what's the a rather a distant perspective on all of that, and let you and the and the guest editors work to make those decisions. So I don't have a lot to say about that process. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Daud, thank you very much, Daud, for offering me this opportunity to say a little bit about the process. I think you're quite right. I think you also have heard a lot about my kind of feedback as well, both positive and negative. I guess I can hear by using this opportunity.
But I've thought of one thing, and I think that I think it was a very productive relationship that you developed with the editors, and from my perspective, it's the way an ideal special issue scenario should unfold. Because as someone trained in South Asian history, I'm aware of the new institutional economics and such that Janet's talking about, and of course Marxist traditions and such, but I don't have any kind of detailed knowledge of East Asia, and it was, I could not have taken on the role that you did, and so it's really fortunate that we had such a proactive associate editor. So had this been in Central Asia, where we don't have an associate editor, okay, or Southeast Asia, it would have been, I would have in a way been, forced to take a more active role without that kind of knowledge. So I feel like, a lot of credit goes to you, Weipin, for bringing, bringing this to our attention, urging the journal to consider this, and really seeing it through from conception to the issue in print, which has just appeared. I should also say that there was a delay in the issue of in the publication of the issue because of issues at Cambridge, but that's another point. They had a cyber event, not different from what happened to the British Library a year ago, but which delayed everything. But like, you saw through that whole process, and I provided support when necessary. But really, it's a story of you and the guest editors. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Daud. Thank you for your kind words. I guess here I can use this opportunity to share a kind of reflective thought on the process, but I will keep it brief. I think the main challenge, I would say, is really about finding reviewers. So each article requires a standard, requires 2 reviewers. So I also thank many friends, whether we know in person or anonymously. Thank you very much for making the contribution by reviewing our articles. I know in these days, everybody is under tremendous amount of pressure. So thank you very much for the generosity of people's time and attention. Yeah, that's all I think I should mention in this occasion. So Hailian, how about you? How about, can you share with us some kind of your experience, the challenge in bringing these special issues together? You talk to authors all the time. Would you like to share with us?
Okay, thank you. That's a fresh up about the memories in the past 2 years, and so that's that's my first guest editor special issue. So that's, so I do not have a comparison with whatever going on, but I think my co-editor, Professor Nakamura, and I were very pleased with by receiving all the support from your editor's side, and so we really benefit a lot, full of support, including the opportunity to communicate with the peer reviewers, and yes, for the different step to make it possible. And that's a really great pleasure for me and honor to have worked with you. And on the other side, in the connection with the authors, so it's said it's a challenge. There's some kind of challenge. It's mostly because of this kind of multidisciplinary discussions, because we also challenge like the terms even. I can tell a little bit about why we choose the term expertise in the end, because I mentioned at the beginning we wanted to do something related to the human resources or specialization and professionalization, etc. So the challenge was there, for example, when we had several pre-meetings already before our Congress and before publishing and collecting those papers in the end. So during there many several talks that we found that it's kind of surprisingly interesting, like from different scholars on the labor studies or on the engineering studies, that they employ the terms like professionalization and specialization, how strictly, and we had a disagreement at some point. And so that's why, but we also agree that we were dealing with something together that address the kind of skilled labor or cultivation of kind of expertise. And so at the beginning we had a kind of twist of struggles over using which kind of term we should really focus on, that everybody is happy about that. So that's how in the end we came through. And but at one point we realized that's important is the historical context really mattered to clarify with the East Asian context. We could not totally just copy a definition term used in the normal Western context or by sociologists and different subjects. So that's why we came up with the notion of expertise in the end to emphasize the knowledge and to be gained or informed through the practices in a variety of domains that we dealt with, like trade, engineering, and education, and other informal training systems. So this is I think I would say that's the biggest challenge for us, and to put all the paper together. That's nice to have some scholars specialize in engineering studies and labor studies, and also merchant in the commercial management. But then we are also happy with agree on this term, and we found really expertise and institutionalized expertise is quite stimulating in the end. So that's kind of happy end with this, go through this challenge. And also another thing is certainly there's kind of thinking about how to put our paper together in a way of to be able to communicate, make dialogues in the term of comparative perspectives, because we dealt with a wide regions in East Asia. And I think the solution, as you could see in the order of this special issue, that we have three kind of sets of articles. They speak well, or they were relatively well paired with each other. Like one set, the first set is dealing with merchant and commercial management, the papers by Lin Yuzhu and Naofumi Nakamura. So they speak of the everyday resources, like sugar on the one hand, on the other hand, talk about the industrial goods and materials acquisition. So that's one set. Another set is about the engineers. Yeah, this group, three papers, including Wada and Wu and my own papers that speak together about Japan, to compare with Japan, Meiji Japan, late Qing, and Republic in China. So together. And the last set is on this we call it marginalized actors in this industrial transition. That's about the labor workforce, and the papers by Janet and Professor Lin. So in this way, we find a solution. But of course, our special issue have very limited choice in terms of case studies. So we try to put those case studies together and to enable the different fields or the area of different area studies that they could communicate in a kind of way. So I hope also the readers would find this also stimulating, or it could inspire their research in the future in some kind of way.
Thank you, Hailian. It sounds like sweet and bitter mixed experience, but feels like more sweet than bitter. So thank you very much. And I also heard both Janet and Hailian talk a lot about interdisciplinary approach. So I totally agree. I think this this special issue is very rich in that way. So my next question to Janet and Hailian really is about whether you have, after this special issue, whether you have any thoughts on new perspectives and new approaches for economic history or modern East Asian history. Janet, would you like to come in first?
Yes, I'm not sure how far this is new, but I think certainly from an economic history perspective, I think the whole interdisciplinary approach is of crucial importance. I mean, one of the things that has always attracted me to economic history is that it is essentially interdisciplinary. Everything is relevant. If the bottom line is, where do you get your next meal from tomorrow? Everything becomes important. So the luxury of economic history, very often seen in traditional economic history, is that you can talk about whatever you like because it's all relevant. But as we know, sort of academic economic history has, I think, increasingly over recent decades been characterized by the growing use of economic theory and quantitative methods as the basic framework. And these frameworks are, of course, very valuable to our understanding. But they are also constrained in that they only allow us to explore or answer specific historical questions. Economic theory of different kinds and numbers can often expose correlations and relationships, but they don't very often always offer us insights into causality, the sort of why questions, which ultimately is what most historians want to ask. Scholars, I think, within economic history, and this is true of many of them, they need to be open-minded in interdisciplinary terms, in the questions and the frameworks that they use to structure their historical investigations. And I think in that light, one of the strengths of this special issue is asking new questions of historical data and locating them within a broader comparative framework, especially of East Asia, but also globally. I think the interdisciplinary approach also allows for a focus on individuals, sort of classic sort of economics-oriented economic history. Individuals don't tend to figure very much. But a focus on individuals can often act to bring the historical narrative alive. And I think we mustn't forget that history is in many ways ultimately storytelling, and everybody likes a good story. So the special issue, obviously, a number of the papers focus on individuals. Hailian's paper, Yuju Lin's paper, and then Naofumi Nakamura focuses our attention on some of the oyatoi, the hard foreign experts, who were crucial channels in the transmission of expertise into industrializing Japan. Of course, and I think this resonates with what Hailian has already said, individuals are just that. They are namely individuals. So we have to be cautious of the broader conclusions we draw from the individual experience. But we can use them as case studies. We can compare them and contrast them with other individuals and use them to bring together the historical narrative and important historical questions. And so I think, as many of these papers show, they are a crucial part of the overall institutionalization process and the technology transfer process. But I'd like to sort of finish sort of in conjunction with that by trying to locate how I see Japan in this special issue. As many will know, for much of the second half of the 20th century, there was a tendency in scholarship on the social and economic history of Japan to consider Japan as sui generis, something that could only be considered on its own. And this, I think, was both because of Japan's status as the first non-Western industrial economy, but also because there was a very strong rhetoric regarding Japanese uniqueness, not only from some non-Japanese scholars, but also from many Japanese, including scholars and policymakers. Thankfully, that phase has long passed, and there is much more work locating Japan in comparative perspective along the lines of this special issue. In work that allows us to compare the economic development, the institutions, the knowledge acquisition in Japan, both with other parts of Asia and in global perspective. So I think this special issue is a good example of the ways in which scholarship on Japan in particular has advanced. Of course, all countries' historical experiences are in one way or another unique, but it is the role of the historian to balance that with a globally and comparatively informed analysis. And hopefully, and I believe that this is delivered by the papers in this issue. So we can go beyond just East Asia, but locate it more broadly.
Thank you very much, Janet. Hailian, would you like to come in?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Janet, very much for making this, about this summary of our issues, special issues highlight in the terms of interdisciplinary. And I just said that multidisciplinary for the special issue altogether. And Weipin also mentioned the difficulties in finding peer reviewers, and it's certainly it's also related to the personal work and working load, etc. But on the other hand, it also mirrors another situation. It's like when we do interdisciplinary studies, research for individual scholars, that the challenge is also to whom, which group you can speak to. And so for my personal observation, although what I have learned a lot from this special issue is really about the phenomenon like industrialization. It's not only about something happened in the economic sphere, but also in the social, cultural, and the political domains. So that's also, I think that's a kind of new direction or trend for the future studies, that when we study about this time period in East Asia and probably also elsewhere about the industrial transition, what happened in late 19th century and the early 20th century. And I think that seems like expertise, knowledge, or information flows or mobilization, that they actually was one process in those regions that runs through this the educational or industrial or political system in terms of transformations. So I think that's probably something would be interesting for the readers if we go through those papers and get some kind of reflections on this kind of new trend for the future. Yeah, in terms of interdisciplinary inspirations. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you. I quite like what you both said about individual stories within a big context. And we historians do have to learn how to do storytelling in a more compelling and more attractive way, and bring something probably in, for most people think it's kind of dry history, economic history, dry history, into a kind of public attention, really. So, well, thank you very much. Daud, I have another question for you. It's because by being working so closely with you for almost 2 years in the past, I also noticed that many journals of humanities have stopped doing spatial issues. So can you tell us, with the hat of the editor of this journal, can you tell us the meaning of this spatial issue for a journal and for the maybe even bigger humanities, these subjects?
Yes, I mean, special issues, I think, present a unique opportunity for journals to think outside of, I mean, the usual mode of individual academic production. I mean, there are, of course, opportunities that we can see in the publishing world of edited volumes and such. But interestingly, I think one of the nice things about special issues is that the curation of special issues, at least the way we've seen in the case of this special issue, is much more sustained, and the editors take much more of an interest than in the in the book publishing sort of context. So most book publishers would not have, they'd have someone in my role who might be a commissioning editor, but they wouldn't have someone who is a regional editor taking an active interest, collaborating in many ways with the special issue editors, right? To have such a curated and interactive process. And so I think that's one of the unique things about special issues. I mean, something that Hailian said, which struck me also, is that, this originated in a conference, and then to a certain extent originated in a disagreement in a conference. And I thought, this is one of the things about scholarship, which increasingly, which I don't necessarily think, all humanities scholarships, is necessarily going in this direction, but it is an older tradition that points of disagreement are often extremely generative and can provide ways to rethink and find middle ground and open up new perspectives for any particular discipline or set of disciplines or around a particular theme or period or such. And if we think back, some of the most exciting reading I did as a junior scholar was in special issues of Journal of Peasant Studies and other things where there was a big debate, right? And debates are hugely generative for fields. And I tend to think that, partly because of the polemicized character of humanities scholarship and which comes together with a highly individuated, career-oriented pursuit of knowledge, there's been a kind of there's been a slight diminishment of the older, what I think of as an older tradition, where scholars came together, disagreed, and everybody walked away enlightened. Today, it's too much. Scholars come together and disagree, and everyone walks away traumatized or in some way, further embedded in their own idea or entrenched in their own ideas. And so what I really like about the narrative that I'm hearing here is the fact that, you had a conference, there was a very interesting and productive disagreement on points, and that led ultimately to the idea that we have to, approach this issue carefully and together, and we will find some, that we can generate something out of this. And I mean, it doesn't have to be a major ideological debate or anything like that, but I think that's kind of, to my mind, the best kind of genesis one can have for a special issue. And I think that this special issue, is exemplary in that regard. And so, that's kind of my perspective on special issues, rather than just collections of works on one piece. I mean, this is ideal because you're actually seeing people with different perspectives come together to try to work out the way forward on a particularly important theme, rather than a collection of essays all on the same topic. I mean, that is kind of what I think of as a kind of not so enticing idea, just to bring essays together that otherwise would be dispersed. So that's how I think about special issues. And so this is to me a really a kind of ideal special issue.
Thank you, Daud. Just before we go, can you tell us how many special issues the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Societies have per year? How many?
I think we try to balance. I mean, there are some journals that have gone entirely over to special issues, and there's some that have, resisted them. But we try to publish about 50% of our content in special issues. And of course, it all depends. There's a vetting process, and it has to be approved by the editorial board. But we have a form and a questionnaire. But yeah, we try to maintain about a 50-50 balance between individual articles and special issues. But I think increasingly there's a lot of excitement about special issues across the journal industry. I mean, as it were, from what I hear from other editors of modern Asian studies and such. So yeah, I think if I can take this opportunity to for those scholars out there who are thinking of putting together special issues, we are particularly welcome to receive them at the JRAS. And so you can be in contact with Matty, who is not any longer present, but who is our kind of chief administrator of the journal. And but there's also, I think, a downloadable form on the website. So and you can always reach out to me. But we do encourage special issues. And again, as I said, I think this is an exemplary special issue, and it's come together, perfectly. And we're very happy at the journal with the outcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think with this, we naturally reach the end of this podcast. Thank you very much to our guests, and thank you for watching. Look out for further podcasts from the Society. Goodbye.